today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about how to build wealth and prosperity and have a strong present partnership. The actual original statement was the love of money is the root of all evil. Are you tracking what I just said? It's not money that's evil, it's the love of money. What is meant by love of money? What's meant is when earning money, having money, the pursuit of money becomes the primary thing in your life, which is really easy to do in our culture. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Richheller, and today we're talking about, can you build wealth and stay emotionally present? You know, there's a popular mythology out there about wealth building. We have all kinds of misconceptions about it. Basically, here's the myth. Money is the root of all evil, right? And at the same time, we live in a capitalist society that is focused on what? Building wealth. Not only do we live in a capitalist society that's focused on building wealth, but the survival and well-being of our family, the forward motion of our dreams and vision of our children's future in many ways is contingent to some extent on how much wealth we've accumulated. But it is more than that also, because after all, this is rich in relationship, not rich in money making. But having prosperity is a vital part of having a family that's moving forward and that's succeeding in its goals. And so here's the problem with the myth, money is the root of all evil. It actually isn't money that's bad. Money is a symbol. And it's also a misquote, all right? The actual original statement was the love of money is the root of all evil. Are you tracking what I just said? It's not money that's evil, it's the love of money. And I want to be even clearer. What is meant by love of money? What's meant is when earning money, having money, the pursuit of money becomes the primary thing in your life, which is really easy to do in our culture. And so this episode is all about how to embrace prosperity in the fullest sense of the word. It's about what's the purpose of money. If we focus on purpose rather than just accumulation, it opens the door. It opens the door to a whole new kind of relationship, a whole new kind of relationship with ourselves, a whole new kind of relationship with our work, with our partner, with our family, with our community. So this is a super important topic. A listener says, my wife says, I'm losing our family, but I don't know what else to do. I'm working, I'm providing, I'm showing up. Isn't that what a good husband's supposed to do? And yeah, dude, absolutely. That's part of what any good partner does. They work, they provide in whatever way provision shows up. Provision could look like I'm making sandwiches, by the way. Provision could look like I'm taking the money we have and distributing it properly so that our future is in mind. Provision isn't just slamming the cash on the table. A good partner not only works, provides, and shows up, but they live purposefully, and that is what's missing. So many of us, rich in relationship included, have confused earning money as provision. We've confused making money and accumulating money, or at least making money and spending it on the right things for being present for our family. So many of us have bought what the wider culture is selling us. They're selling us this image of the provider as providing the right clothes, the right watch, the right car, the right house, the right education. If you go to the right pre-K, your kid's going to go to Harvard or Yale. And then they'll be in with who? The right people. Why? It's because they'll be rich. in wealth accumulation, but will they be rich in relationship? See, the paradox of the provider is that the prime wage earner, let's throw out he and she for a second, because 30% of households, the prime wage earner is female. The prime wage earner supplies everything materially, but the emotional connection is lost because it takes, when your focus is material provision, we start to lose sight of the purpose of the material. Inevitably, studies show that women are carrying the emotional load, whether they're the prime wage earner or not. They are carrying the emotional load. And statistically, more men are carrying the emotional load than women. In fact, statistically, even when women are the prime wage earner, very often the men are managing the long-term investment of finances. That's all out of whack. It's all unbalanced. And when the distribution of labor, let's call it, is unbalanced, both people start to get tired and exhausted. They feel unappreciated. They feel unseen. It looks stable, but it feels empty. And who feels it more than the couple? That's right. Your children. Your children are like distracting themselves with screens. You've got them going to 110 activities, but underneath it all, your children sense when you are not of the same mind. They sense when the connection is missing. They sense it. They feel it. They sense the sadness and the hurt and the anger. They sense it all. All we think, as long as we don't do stuff, fight, cry in front of them, they're fine. But the truth is that human beings, when we first arrive, we're highly emotionally sensitive beings. And it's over time that we put layers over our hearts to protect ourselves from the pain and the suffering of our parents. Over time, we put layers over our hearts to protect ourselves from the thrashing of our parents as they act out on each other and sometimes even on us. At Rich in Relationship, our mission is to chip away at those hearts of stone that we start developing as children in upside-down families, and then we carry into our marriage and impose on our own children. The long-term cost of living this way is emotional debt. If your marriage is a business, it's going into emotional debt. Or if your marriage is a bank account, you might be living in the overdraft, which is basically a loan for the bank until you figure out how to pay it off. Overdraft protection is basically, yeah, we're willing to front you some money. We figure you're good for it. Couples do that too. They front each other some emotional overdraft protection, but that'll only go so far. And just like a bank, when the overdraft protection isn't paid, there starts to be noise. Hey! And it starts compounding interest negatively. There's resentment. And when we find that expressing, hey, what's going on here doesn't work, there just becomes what? Quiet drift in the relationship, a quiet drift. You drift apart into your corners. You develop parallel lives syndrome. Let me tell you about Brad and Gwen. And for those of you who have been with me for a while, you know that Brad and Gwen are pseudonyms, and that the stories that I tell here are not connected to real people, but they are true. There's a difference between real and true. A real story is something that actually happened and is exactly rendered. A true story is one that we know in our hearts happens. And our true stories are based on years and years of helping couples who have this problem and some of the other problems we cover here to resolve the challenge of that relationship, because it's not their fault. Nobody gave them a manual. In fact, the manuals that we were given by our parents are outdated, for one, maybe even have some dysfunctional instructions. Or a better way to put it would be, if it were a program, the programs that our parents gave us that operate like a manual have viruses in them. They're It's old code and there's viruses in them. So anyway, Brad and Gwen, they look like success. They lived in Westchester County, affluent county, highest taxes probably in the country, but people still live here for the schools. They live in Westchester County for the glory, for the glamour. If people who live in Westchester, if they can afford the taxes and afford the cost of homes, it says something about who and where you are in the world, but certainly in the world of New York. Brad and Gwen, they had a nice home in Westchester, big, expensive, lots of taxes. They both had solid careers. They both worked. They were healthy. They had a healthy toddler. But beneath the surface, Gwen was like, "What, Brad, you're like so emotionally unconscious. Brad, why do I have to work at keeping your family and my family tuned in? Brad, why is it that I arrange all the social gatherings? Brad, who are your friends? And why is it that your friends don't spend time with us? What is going on? Brad, why aren't you connecting more to the kids?" And don't get me wrong, Brad took the kids to soccer. He took the kids to events. He even showed up at school events, but somehow he was emotionally disconnected. You see, no one had taught Brad how to have the full range of his emotions. The model he was given was that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. That kind of thing. That sad, hurt, alone, afraid are signs of weakness. And the only answer to them is to be angry and frustrated and move forward and attack. For Brad, the best defense is a good offense. So basically, Brad and Gwen, they were following the cultural scripts that they were handed, the programming that their parents gave them, the manual that they were handed. They had the right house in the right community. Kids were going to good schools. They had good jobs. They were posting on Facebook, moms of whatever, dads of whatever, parents of whatever, in those groups. They were going to the right fundraisers. They were partying and drinking with the best. They were following the cultural script. But still, something was missing. And Gwen would say to Brad, "Something's wrong. Brad, where are you? Why won't you connect with me?" Brad would try. Every time that Gwen said, "Why don't you connect with me?" Brad would say, "I'm working at it. I'm fixing this problem." Sometimes Brad would say, "I am connecting with you. You're just not seeing it." Best defense is a good offense. And Gwen would be hurt. Sometimes Brad would say, "What do you want me to do?" And she would say, "I want you to manage the social calendar." And then Brad would set up something, and Gwen would still be managing all the emotional players. See, Brad just didn't get it. It wasn't about the doing. It was about where he was coming from. It was about knowing how the other players felt. It was about knowing what Gwen really wanted, and he couldn't because Brad is a human doing. And somehow, no matter what Gwen said, Brad heard something different. And he tried to fix it, and every time he tried to fix it, she felt manipulated and controlled, and they grew further and further apart. And my friends, this is the most common script for husbands and wives on the planet. And where it goes is pain, frustration, hurt, distance. It leads to financial infidelity, which is where you spend money without telling your partner, money that the family needs. It leads to emotional intimacy without necessarily having sex with someone who's not your partner, but your partner still feels betrayed because why aren't you being that way with them? Because we have needs. And when the needs aren't met in the relationship because we're missing each other, we start to seek to be fulfilled in our individual lives. And the more we find fulfillment in our individual lives, the more it takes us away from our family. And the more it takes us away from our family, like was happening to Brad and Gwen, the hollower the experience. And who pays for it? The children. A listener writes, "He says he wants to be closer, but whenever I bring it up, he gets angry and defensive. He insists he's just doing his best. I just don't know how to break through the logjam. See, beneath the defensiveness is discouragement. That's what Brad was feeling. He's discouraged. He's doing everything he knows how to do. He's dancing as fast as he can. Beneath her frustration, your frustration, listener, is longing. You want partnership, not the perfect life. And what's partnership? Partnership is someplace where we can communicate in a way that is caring, and not only communicate in a way that's caring, but have our feelings heard and validated. Not only have our feelings heard and validated, but for some of us, have our feelings understood and feel respected, depending on who you are. Here's the deal. Couples do not need to choose between security and closeness. It's not that everyone needs to work their butts off to have all the right things and can't be close. They can. You can have it all. I hate that statement because sometimes when we try to have it all, we do too much and it stresses out the family. In a lot of ways, the situation between Brad and Gwen was they're trying to have it all kind of situation. But what I really mean by you can have it all is you can have closeness. You can have caring communication where people feel heard, their emotions validated, where people feel they're understood, where people feel they're respected. And what that's going to create is safety and trust, and vulnerability, which is the real challenge Brad and Gwen experienced, is how to be vulnerable with each other. And out of vulnerability is that intimacy that Brad and Gwen experienced when they were mad in love, fired up for each other, when everything was juicy and good and simple. You can't go back to in love, but you can go back to something like it. It can be juicy and good, and sometimes even simple. Though honestly, with kids, it always feels a little complicated, doesn't it? The way that you have it all is you need to change your focus below. Having it all doesn't mean that it might mean that you have the right house, car, etc. But what it really means is that your choices fulfill your sense of purpose as an individual, your sense of purpose as a partner, your sense of purpose as a father or a mother, your sense of purpose as a member of your family, a sense of purpose as a member of the community, your sense of purpose as part of the greater good, to use a generic term. I never know who's listening. For me, it's God. You might not believe in God, and I'm good with that, if that's your belief, and that's where you need to be. But sense of purpose means that we are contributing in some way to something bigger outside of ourselves, and the greater good would qualify as that. So if you're agnostic or atheist, latch onto the greater good. And let's not get into political definitions of the greater good. Let's stick with generic definitions of the greater good. Having a sense of connection to the greater good is what helps us lean into what we call the 4 pillars of prosperity. The 4 pillars are: 1, provision. Provision is providing financial and emotional stability. Emotional stability is grounded in connection. Connection is the most basic form of spirituality. Spirituality is based on connection. We're all spiritual beings. We're all being spiritual all the time. It's not like there's a separate spirituality going on. What I'm doing right now, I'm talking to you and you're hearing what I'm saying. You may not agree with it, but you're hearing it. There's a connection here. Something spiritual is happening. There is no accident that you are hearing what I'm saying, and there is no accident that I'm saying this to you. Second, presence. Presence is not just my body's in the room and I'm thinking about what I need to do for work. Presence is emotional availability. And for men, this is particularly challenging, though I'm meeting younger generations that are better at this because they're less restricted by societal frames that were handed down from their fathers who had a very limited concept of what emotional availability is. But I'm noticing that younger generations are lacking a concept of what it means to be strong as a man. And not only that, but in many ways, even though their emotions are more on top, they seem to not see that there's a difference in the way genetically male bodies process emotion and genetically female bodies process emotion. Let's throw out who we say we are, feel we are. Let's just talk about the genetics of the chemistry of the body that we're in. Hormone therapy might change that. Surgery, not so much. Our brain was formed at a certain point in life and is going to have genetically male patterns of processing emotion or genetically female patterns of processing emotion, regardless of what gender we feel we are. There are some studies that show that men who have lower testosterone and higher estrogen may have brains that are more feminine in structure and processing. So this is not an absolute. I'm speaking in broad brushstrokes here, generalizations. In the world of generalizations, there's always a scale, 1, 10. So I don't know where everyone falls. Everyone falls somewhere different on that scale. But emotional availability has to do partly with the genetic and chemical makeup of our body and brain, has something to do with what we're taught culturally, that we can shed. But even the genetic makeup of our body and brain, neuroscience has taught us that the brain is fairly fluid. We can't make there be more or less connections between the hemispheres by much. We can't change that much. But we can, through practice, through intentionality, through clarity of where we're going and we can, if we are less emotionally in tune, become more emotionally in tune. And if we're overly emotionally in tune, we can tweak and tune that in also. So emotional availability means that we're in tune with our emotions. We call it here, by the way, emotional fluency, not emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence makes it sound like it's something you can learn in school. It is something you can learn, but no one teaches you in school. Emotional fluency is first, you have the ability to name your feelings. And you have the ability to feel them and allow them and move through the feelings instead of avoiding them. Many people have a tendency to compartmentalize and avoid. We want to move through. And third, once we can name it, once we've experienced it, move through it, we can express it in a way that others can receive. We could share our experience of the emotion in a way that they find what? Relatable. That helps them feel connected. That's what we call empathy. And out of empathy comes compassion. When we can feel a connection to someone, that's when we have the opening to compassionately work with them. Compassion is to support them through that emotional connection. So provision and presence, that leads to partnership. That leads to partnership in any relationship, but in a marriage, that is a particularly special kind of partnership. The partnership of marriage is, I see something in you that is so amazing, and you see something in me that is so amazing. In fact, it might be more than we see ourselves as being. Often it is. And our contract is that I go to the hilt to support you in being that person that I see you as. Well, that is a misstatement. I go to the hilt in supporting you in being the best and most fulfilled and happy person you can possibly be. That's different than what I see you as. So sometimes we see our partners as one thing. We see the potential of their, call it life tree, but they decide that they're going to prune some branches and grow in a slightly different direction. In a marriage, we support that as long as it's what? Supports the greater good and is to their benefit, not on our selfish desire to have a certain kind of partner. I want you to know I got personal experience with that one. And they do the same with us. They support us in being the most fulfilled, purposeful, happy, joyful, and prosperous in the biggest sense of the word person that we can be. Right? Purpose is the fourth P, of course. They're supporting us in the partnership in our purpose. And the purpose is not only that we are each individually fulfilled and happy and joyful and living abundant, prosperous lives together. And we're going to talk more about prosperity in a second, but that we're supporting the purpose of the marriage and the relationship by feeding into that relationship. And the purpose of that marriage and relationship is not just to help us grow individually, it's to create a legacy for our children and for our grandchildren, a legacy of healing, a legacy of growth, a legacy of joy, a legacy of prosperity, a legacy of making a difference in the lives of everyone we touch, either knowingly or unknowingly. The best is unknowingly, when they come back to you and say, I can't tell you what a difference that made. I did that with a teacher once. He didn't even remember who I was. I said, it doesn't matter. If you remember who I was, you changed my life. Anyway, I'm going on. So let me tell you what happened with Brad and Gwen, right? Let's finish the story. Brad and Gwen, guess what? They started working here with us here at Rich in Relationship. They joined our community, got a free call. Out of the free call, we identified what was they were hoping for and the pain they were in. And it turned out we had the right tools for them. If I didn't have the right tools for them, I wouldn't be telling you about Brad and Gwen. Someone else would be. They first learned to end the destructive conflict that was going on, which was where Brad would get frustrated, best defense is good offense, and where Gwen would constantly be expressing her need in a way that felt critical to him. That was their particular destructive conflict. Everyone's got their own special dance they do. And I want to be clear, in a marriage or in a relationship or a partnership that's not quite working, when it's not quite working, both partners are contributing to that dance in some way. It's pretty rare that it's one-sided. They got past that. They learned to communicate their feelings in ways that felt safe. For Brad, a lot of that meant having his feelings. For Brad, that meant learning how to manage his anger so he could express it in a way that felt safe to Gwen. For Gwen, that meant learning to express her emotions in a way that was personally responsible and felt safe to Brad. They learned to really listen. And once they had this, they started to identify what the pitfalls were. What was the faulty programming they had from their parents? And they noticed when it came up that maybe that was time to stop talking, because they decided they were not going to engage in that dance anymore. And they would go to their corners, reset, and re-engage. Gwen discovered that giving him space to practice emotional leadership opened up new doors. Brad discovered that when stepping into emotional leadership, what that meant for him was there was a lot of emotional gym time for Brad. And they came out of it learning new lessons about how to be prosperous. The lessons they learned about being prosperous is that it isn't just about having a nice house. It's good to have a nice house, but what's the experience the house is creating for the family? And they started having more people over. And Brad started not only coaching his kids in soccer, but he started talking to them about, hey, let's talk about losing that game. Boy, that felt terrible. But what Brad learned was there's no real losing. There's only an opportunity to learn. Every time they lost a game, he talked about, all right, what can we do better? And they learned to do better, and he learned to do better. They learned to take their money and invest in family experiences. They learned that having the right car meant having a car that served their family experiences. The brand wasn't so bad either, but it had to be the right size. It had to have the right qualities. It had to be safe. They created over time, as they grew closer and closer, purpose projects. They got involved with their church. As their children got older, because of what they learned about helping people in other communities, not just giving money, but actually helping people in other communities, going to soup kitchens. Their kids went on missions trips. Hey, if you've ever had a child go on a mission trip, whether it be in a synagogue, a church, or a mosque, it is the most character-building experience a child can have. Because they go to another country and they come back suddenly appreciating how much we have here and how much suffering there is in the rest of the world. Partly because they don't have, and partly because, just like us, the programming's not what it could be between the years. 3 months into this, Gwen said, he's not just providing. Brad is here. He's all here, and every day he's more here. And Brad said, I used to think wealth was what I earned. And now I see it's what we experience and what we give. Ooh. All right. Oh, sorry. Had a moment there. It's so true. True prosperity is about connection. It's about circulation. It's about creating shared joyful experiences, not necessarily accumulation. Well, I'll take that back. Accumulation is really useful when it comes to retirement money, when it comes to college money, and having emergency money. If you don't have those things going on, you need to start working on it. True prosperity happens when couples align on finances. They're both equally cognizant of finances, involved in finances. One may be handling certain aspects of certain qualities of finances more than the other, and the other may be handling other qualities, but they both understand the full depth, breadth of the finances because they're planning together. True prosperity happens when they use those finances not just to have all the right stuff, but to have the right experiences, character building experiences, experiences that bring them closer together, that represent their values and the values they want to communicate to their children. Real prosperity and provision happens when both parents show up for each other, for the relationship, and for the household. If your relationship feels rich on paper, but poor in connection, just start by looking at our free community group. A lot of the tools that we gave Brad and Gwen are in there. You can try them on. If they don't feel quite right, or if you're not sure what to do with them, or maybe they make more trouble than help, you probably need a little guidance. Use the free call that's part of that free community. The only way you can get that free call is in that free community. And the free community is just a place where you can get tools and get guidance, free guidance on your relationship, because that's what we're about. I do this because I want your children to have prosperity and joy like my brother and I, and some of my children even never experienced, but are experiencing today. Thanks to the grace of God. Next episode, the little things that become big things. How emotional debt builds. We're going to get more and more into this topic of emotional debt. And again, join our free community. Go to richinrelationship.com. And in the meantime, have a wonderful day and an awesome tomorrow. And thank you for listening.